Well, here's a topic that I've been thinking about making a video for quite some time. I want to talk about the perfume clone dupe inspired by industry that seems to be growing larger and larger, especially you notice it if you are on social media platforms and follow a variety of perfume influencers, not that everyone talks about clones, but there are some social media influencers that do spend a lot of time talking about clone fragrances. So I'm going to try and cover what clones are, who they benefit, why they might be good for some people, particularly why they might be bad for the industry in general, how they're made to an extent, and just to state right at the beginning of this video, I'm not someone who encourages using clones, dupe fragrances, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But I am going to try and be balanced about this topic because really, to me, this is I can understand why people buy clones and dupes of particular fragrances, and I'll try and explore a little bit into why people are buying those, and the reasons they might be doing that. So there are various. To me, there appears to be like a spectrum of perfume clone brands out there. There are brands that basically don't even try and disguise the fact that they're copying more popular fragrances. I know that there's a small pharmacy around the corner from where I live, and I can walk into there and they have like a discount table there with very obvious copies of popular fragrances. The bottles might be shaped similarly to the original. The color scheme of the bottles might be similar. And then there might be a play on the name of that fragrance as well. They're to me like really obvious copies where whoever is manufacturing those are trying to, I don't know, like I don't know how I guess they're trying to fool the consumer into thinking, well, this is a much better value at the fraction of the original's price. If you try this, you're going to get something approximating the original. And a lot of the time, with that particular style of clone, where they try to make the packaging look similar to the original, the smell is not even probably going to get very close to the original. And honestly, I don't even know how these companies get away with doing that, because that seems to me like more of a breach of intellectual property than brands like, for instance, Dior and Alexandria, who basically have built their brand in by recreating popular original fragrance profiles. The packaging will be their own, usually with things like with brands like Dior and Alexandria. They have a uniform bottle. They will have a different name for the fragrance that would suggest the original, and I think, basically they make it as obvious as possible without straight up saying this is a copy of Aventus, or this is a copy of Baccarat Rouge, for instance, and they have built their business over making not necessarily lower cost, but cheaper versions of more popular, usually more expensive original fragrances. Then there are also some companies who don't make it so obvious that they're copying an original fragrance. They might use words like inspired by, or suggest that their version is a variation of another fragrances. Like I see this quite a bit with, a perfume like Santal 33 has got there are a lot of perfumes out there that essentially are the same scent profile. There might be very minor differences, but when you spray them on, you can see that they've been inspired by an original fragrance. There is a way for the consumer to get an idea of this. I know a lot of the times it comes down to someone's subjective impression about perfumes. But if you go onto some of these fragrance databases like Parfumo, for instance, and I'll show you an example on the screen here, user votes go towards what a particular fragrance reminds them of as well. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the fragrance was deliberately created as a copy or a clone of another fragrance, but this is what I mean by there being a spectrum of this dupe clone phenomena out there when it comes to this industry. So there are varying degrees. And then I'm not even talking about straight up fakes that are sold on eBay or Facebook Marketplace, where someone is using an original bottle and basically filling it with just fragrance that isn't that fragrance. That's just straight up scamming people. Now, my understanding is that quite a few of these brands now would use technology that is becoming more and more available to basically recreate a scent profile. Now, I don't know the particulars or the technicalities of how this works. Now, if you look up things like gas chromatography, this technology allows an analysis of a particular perfume scent profile, and my understanding is that it gives pretty accurate readings of the particular molecule that might be in a scent, and even the amount of it that would be present. And this, to a degree, can give a pretty reasonably accurate picture of how to build a particular accord for a perfume. And I would suggest that a lot of these dupe clone companies would be using this technology to recreate popular scent profiles. You'll also note that a lot of these brands, I'm not crediting a particular perfumer. They don't have a named in-house perfumer that's creating these. This with just a kind of basic rudimentary understanding of how to create or build a perfume, would just need to know about what raw materials to incorporate there and recreate something that basically is quite similar to the original perfume. So this technology is becoming more and more available with an initial financial outlay, I guess, to buy the equipment needed. But it's obvious that it is becoming a lot easier for people outside of the large fragrance houses and trained perfumers to approximate something and start a business, have an initial outlay of cheap bottles and sprayers and the basic equipment that they need, and essentially mass produce clones and dupes of these particular fragrances. So are there pros? Yes, there are. Are there cons? Yes, there are, obviously. I'm going to talk about the pros of buying clones and dupes. Now, the most obvious one that a lot of people bring up is definitely the cost of most clone and dupe fragrances. And this is totally understandable. And as a consumer of fragrance, if you are the type of person that simply views a fragrance as an accessory and it's an addition to your general grooming and how you want to be put together, and you just want to smell nice and you want to smell like your favorite perfume, or a perfume that you smelled in a department store that you really liked but was outside of your budget, that mindset I totally understand. So also something to consider is that they might be more accessible to people. A lot of these are sold online as well. And if you already know that a particular perfume, a particular clone might smell like one of your favorite perfumes, but that favorite perfume is just too difficult to find in your area, you kind of know what you're getting in terms of a smell, and it's usually easy enough to order and as I said, low cost. Another pro for the consumer, for the wearer, is that because of the cost, because of the accessibility, it gives you a little bit of freedom to experiment or to see. Look, I know when I first started getting into perfume, there were a lot of perfumes that I read about and heard about that were highly praised, but I had no access to them. And I was able to. There was actually a store here. There's actually a couple of stores here in Melbourne by a brand that I'm not going to name here that only sell dupes of perfumes. And I was able to walk in there and pick out the particular perfume clone of the one that I wanted to smell and try it on to see what it actually smelled, well, to see what it was supposed to smell like. And I got the impression from that dupe, and then I was able to see whether I liked it. But my intention was just to see what it smelled like, and then if I liked it, I would try and get the original or try and sample the original. But the thing about that is that there with clone brands, there's not a lot of they're not thinking about innovating. They're not thinking about being original. I know some of these brands occasionally come out with what they say is their own original composition, and that's something I don't know too much about, and I'm not sure how popular those particular perfumes are. But for me, all the advantages and pros about the clone industry are for that particular type of consumer of perfumes. And also, obviously, the brands who are making presumably quite a lot of money from them. Now, I wouldn't know too much about the particular cost of making those perfumes, but I don't imagine it would be a lot, especially if they're making so much that they can buy materials in bulk and mass produce. And one thing about the gas chromatography process is that even though it can tell you what particular molecule is present and how much of it is present, what it does not tell you is if that molecule is coming from a specific essential oil. It's only telling you what molecule is there. So there might be like an isolate of rose, for instance, but it's not telling you what rose oil it's come from. So there is no way that gas chromatography can ever replicate or predict or give an analysis that says it used this particular material and this essential oil. It only gives you a breakdown of the particular molecules. And then there's, I guess, a little bit of guesswork involved. So even though something might smell the same or might smell similar, in my experience, every time I've smelled an original fragrance with a dupe, no matter how close they get, there are always some slight differences. Now, whether those differences are enough for the buyer of the fragrance to care or to make an original better or not, that's obviously always going to be a subjective personal opinion. And that's, I guess, where there is where you get to a shift from just a consumer of perfume who doesn't put too much thought into what they're buying or what they're wearing. And as long as they're happy that they're smelling good and they're happy with the way they smell, that's one thing. But most of the people that watch channels like this or who are so into fragrance that they are subscribed to YouTube channels or follow fragrance accounts on Instagram or TikTok, and I'm making some presumptions here, but I believe that if you're this invested in perfume, you do care more about the artistic and creative side of the perfumes you're wearing. And so this kind of shifts into the cons of the dupe and clone industry. So the first most obvious one is the ethical side of this. And if you're of the view that perfume is a utilitarian product like anything that you would consume that's just part of your daily ritual, shampoo, conditioner, face wash, clothes, fragrance, that is like a consumable that you use every day. And you don't give too much thought to the artistic, creative side of that. But then, and I'm including myself in this, then you've got this whole sector of people wearing perfumes who fall in love with it and get deeper into it purely because of the artistic and creative aspect of a perfume. And if you start to look at it start to look at perfume creation as an art, more as opposed to a commodity, you start to wonder why other art forms that have more protections, more legal protections over intellectual property, copyright, like music, for instance, literature, movies, any other type of art form seems to have a bit more protection from being blatantly copied and used for commercial gain. Like I know, just on YouTube, I couldn't use just any piece of music for a video or particular images without seeking some kind of permission to do it. But it doesn't seem that perfume, for whatever reason, has that protection. So there is that ethical aspect because clone companies like Dior, like Alexandria, like Armaf, and many others are making money from someone else's original idea. A perfumer working for a brand has created something from scratch, met a brief, inspired, has gained a loyal following from people who wear and love that perfume. That perfume ends up having an emotional, personal attachment to the wearer. And because they choose to charge a certain price for it, a brand just is able to copy that perfume and say, oh, look over here, we've got your favorite perfume, but you can pay a fraction of the price for it. Now, yes, I totally understand going back to why a person might see the financial side of it as a reason to buy clones. And I will talk about this democratization of fragrance in a moment. But it still feels like you can make intellectual arguments for it, but it always, to me, just feels wrong that you can blatantly copy a fragrance and get some financial reward from it without the original creator seeing any benefits from it. So you think about someone who writes an original song and someone just covering it, making a bunch of money, and that original songwriter is not seeing a cent from the success of the cover, regardless of whether the original is better or the cover is a different take on it. So that's one thing. That to me is the most important thing. The second con about perfume dupes is that there is no guarantee of the quality that you're getting. I'm not so sure that safety standards and the stringent testing that's required from established perfume brands creating their fragrances, making sure all the materials are used in their making sure that all their materials are used in safe proportions and being created within the guidelines set for the consumer are being followed by these dupe brands. And there is also no guarantee that they're using the same materials because they can't possibly know exactly what materials are being used, even with a GC readout of that fragrance. So you've got dubious ethical reasons there. You've got dubious quality control, and then I know that a lot of these dupe and clone brands sometimes using their marketing the fact that, if you love this particular fragrance that doesn't last very long, we've made a copy of it and it lasts for hours. And then people will talk about the fact that it's a longer lasting version of this. Now, that is just a surefire sign to me that they're definitely not using the same materials as the other fragrance. And there are a few ways you can make a fragrance last longer, and that's by using particular aroma chemicals in the base that just naturally have less volatility than other top notes and mid notes. So that to me would tell you that even if the opening and the mid smell quite similar to the original, that I could almost guarantee 9 times out of 10 that the dry down and the base is where you're going to find the biggest differences between an original and a dupe or a clone. Also, the one thing that I realized when I was sort of thinking about this topic as well is that there are more and more brands creating dupes and clones inspired by. There are even some brands that are basically presenting themselves and marketing themselves as niche luxury brands. But when you dig a bit deeper into the perfumes they're creating, they are essentially inspired by big selling, very popular, in some cases, designer perfumes. And I won't name any names, but they do exist. There are some really expensive brands that are essentially making perfumes that are not really original compositions. This is where I'm also a bit suspicious about these brands that that kind of refuse to name who composed the perfume. They don't credit a perfumer, but that's kind of another topic for another time. But what I worry about with the saturation of dupes and clones is that the more that they are in the market, the more that they get sold. I think that just makes it harder and harder for particular designer brands. Okay, let's go to designer brands to be motivated to create more original perfumes. I think it's got a flow-on effect to larger designer brands because people are buying dupes and clones of very big selling popular perfumes, but if these designer brands are looking at it from a commercial aspect, where's the motivation to be creative and original in creating something that doesn't exist yet? So it's like the corporatization of music or the movie industry just wanting to, using templates to create unoriginal pieces of art. So it happens in other art forms as well. And basically it's indirectly stifling creativity and originality. And really now you can you can only really find that originality, uniqueness, and artistic perfumery in the indie artisan world. And thankfully for now, some of those brands, or a lot of those brands, are avoiding being copied or duped. But you can imagine a one-person artisan brand, doing all the work, creating the perfume, bottling the perfume, and spending most of their time outside of creating, filling orders, doing it all themselves. And if one of these dupe brands cottons onto the fact that this particular indie perfumer has created something that's got a bit of buzz going on, what's to stop them from copying that particular fragrance? And all of a sudden, they can produce it and sell it for $40, where even if this indie brand is making the smallest fraction of profit from their work and labor, but has to sell it in the hundreds of dollars, that is just like plain wrong. So I hope that doesn't happen too often, but it wouldn't surprise me if it does. So to me, that those reasons, those cons are just not worth me as a consumer ever wanting to jump on the clone and dupe brand. So what do? I guess you have to think about the reasons. I have to think about the reasons why these dupe and clone brands are as successful as they are. Now, if I wanted to try a perfume that I liked, and it was outside of my budget, this now is speaking to really like this perceived elitism for in fragrance, where one of the arguments made by fans and supporters of clone and dupe brands is that not everyone can afford their bell jar of Serge Lutens or a Dior private line, Chanel Les Exclusives, or these ultra expensive Roger Doves or whatever. That's probably a bad example. And so, why should people who can't afford those perfumes be left out to accessing that art? And my answer to that is, well, I guess over the last decade in particular, it's just become easier and easier, especially if you're in the social media space. But it has become easier and easier to get samples and decants where you would spend probably the same as you would spend on a clone brand for a bottle of that dupe, to actually try and smell the real original fragrance. So you are in no doubt that you're smelling that original fragrance. And then you can make up your mind if you're happy with a decant. You can continue to buy decants and spend the same amount of money. And yes, I do understand that you're getting less liquid perfume for compared to what you would get in a clone bottle. But then you have to ask yourself, well, so why is it so important to own the bottle? So there's a bit of it makes me think that there is an aspect of I don't know what to call it. I don't know what to call it, but there might be this kind of psychological need to have a full bottle or product, and I wonder how much social media has influenced that need to own something rather than to own a piece of something. That I don't know, but there's a certain psychological thing at play to me about that need to own a bottle. There is a section of this community that kind of sort of looks down their nose at, like people who look down their nose at people who use clone brands, but also people look down their nose at people who mainly just wear samples and decants, but have a wall of shelves full of Dior and Armaf and that kind of thing. And even in fragrance YouTube, there are channels or TikTok channels and accounts that essentially are just shilling clone brands. And that's the other thing. Clone brands are much more likely to use marketing budget for influencers and free bottles are sent out, and it's a lot easier for them to get exposure on social media, and that's why they're more visible. There's more saturation. So it's I'm not sure if it's something that is going to decrease, but I guess I just wanted for my own sake to understand this a bit more, and thinking about this issue, and reading into it a little bit more. It's just made me even more. It solidified my opinion that for me, in my world, in my hobby, I in any stretch of the imagination, can't simply afford any perfume I might like. And so I don't for 1 minute think that I am, it's unfair that this brand is out of my reach because of its price. I do think some brands, there is price gouging occurring. That's something that is happening. But I'm always for appreciating creativity, originality, crediting the creator of a particular piece of art. I consider perfume to be art. But it is a consumable art. It's more consumable than a lot of other art forms is. And to me, there's just no justification for buying dupes for someone making money off someone else's original idea. Like I said, if it's a matter of cost, being able to afford perfumes that you love, you can spend the same money and still try and experience the original perfumes. But if that argument doesn't cut it for you, then to me it seems that you just want to be able to have the bottle. And I'm not trying to shame anyone that wears perfume clones or brand or dupes. In the odd case, you might get a dupe that, to your nose, having smelled the original, might smell better. Okay, like I can understand that. Sometimes, song covers might be a more preferable version to you than the original. Remakes of movies, etc., etc. But those guys, those original creators of that song or that movie, are getting paid for that cover or that remake. So it does always come down to this intellectual property. Why is someone making profit from someone else's original idea where the creator of that perfume is not seeing a cent of it, and in fact, indirectly losing from the creation of these dupes. So I've kind of spewed out all my thoughts about that. I'd love to know in the comments what you think about this whole topic of dupes, clones. Are there any points that I've missed here? And I know there are other things I could have talked about, like perfumers creating a particular perfume. For instance, like Pierre Bourdon creating Green Irish Tweed in 1985, and then a few years later tweaking it and creating Cool Water for Davidoff. A lot of people think there's a lot of similarities between those fragrances with some slight tweaks, but is that another area of this whole clone and dupe discourse that needs to be covered? I don't know. I'll leave it at that. But I'm always for creativity, originality, and giving due and credit, and financial reward to the artist, to the brand that made that creation. Enough from me for now, and from him. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.